Hey guys, tonight we begin a journey into a world of castles, candlelight, and courtly grace. When you think of medieval Europe, what comes to mind? Velvet gowns flowing down spiral staircases, ladies sipping from silver goblets, whispers echoing through echoey stone halls, a place where honor ruled and women were elegant, mysterious, and always perfectly poised. Sounds dreamy, right? Well, before you slip too deep into that fantasy, let me ask you something. Would you survive even one day as a medieval woman? Because here's the twist. Behind all that shimmering silk and poetic charm was a maze of utterly ridiculous rules. Rules so petty, so exhausting, so downright absurd, they could make your worst office dress code look like a tropical vacation. Imagine this: you're told how to sit, how to walk, how to smile, even how to cry. And no ugly crying isn't allowed. Only elegant, ladylike tears, thank you very much. And let's not even talk about dinner. One wrong move, one crunch too loud, and suddenly you're not a lady anymore. Just a cautionary tale. So tonight, we're not talking about queens on thrones. We're whispering about the women in the background, holding their breath, tiptoeing on polished floors, trying not to get publicly humiliated for accidentally laughing too loud, because being a medieval woman wasn't just hard, it was a full-time performance. And the audience, judgy and loud. So before you get too cozy, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I'm building here. And while you're at it, drop your city and your local time in the comments below. Dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes in a place that looks like a storybook, sort of. There are turrets in the distance, the soft clop of hooves on cobblestone streets, and a faint scent of rosemary and wood smoke drifting on the cool morning air. You think, wow, this is kind of magical. But then a stern voice cuts through the dream. Keep your eyes down, and for heaven's sake, don't speak unless spoken to. Welcome to being a woman in 14th century Europe. Your fantasy just turned into a full-time etiquette boot camp. Let's set the stage. It's the year 1328 and you're in a manor household just outside Chartres, France. You've just turned 12 prime age for beginning your formal training in becoming a lady. Not a scholar, not a warrior, not even particularly yourself, just a lady. That title comes with a mountain of unwritten rules, and the first, of course, is silence. Silence wasn't just polite, it was law. In the eyes of both the church and courtly society, a quiet woman was a virtuous woman. Loudness was suspicious. Volume equaled vanity. Even tone of voice mattered. Girls were coached from the age of 5 to soften their voices until they sounded like they were permanently on the verge of apologizing. The goal was to float through conversations like a ghost who'd rather not be noticed. Speak only when addressed directly. Keep responses brief, modest, and above all, don't be clever. Wit was for men. Now, if you accidentally slipped a giggle, a sharp word, a sarcastic comment, you might be accused of being a scold. That wasn't just a playground insult. It was a legal term. And the punishment, oh, you'll love this one. The scold's bridle. Picture a metal cage fitted over your entire head with a sharp metal bit jammed into your mouth to hold your tongue in place. It didn't just prevent you from talking, it carved your silence into flesh. A little too gothic, maybe. But that's how things were enforced in late 14th century England, especially in towns like York and Norwich, where records show dozens of women subjected to this very punishment. One town chronicler noted a woman had to wear hers For 2 full market days, while people pointed, stared, and threw rotting apples. Nothing says graceful femininity like forced public humiliation. Let's pause for a moment. Imagine if every time someone on Twitter got a little snarky, they were forced to walk through Times Square wearing a muzzle made of iron. That's not medieval cosplay. That's Tuesday in 1395. But the silence didn't end in the streets. Oh no, it followed you home. When guests came to visit, you weren't allowed to speak to them directly. Your husband, or if you were unmarried, your father or brother would do the talking. You were expected to smile gently, maybe offer a courteous nod, and absolutely not engage in any sort of banter or opinion sharing. Think of it as customer service with no speaking privileges. At a royal banquet, things were even more specific. Documents from the Burgundian court in the 1430s include pages of rules for noble women dining at public events. One line, loosely translated, says, "Let not the lady's words be heard above the spoon's sound, lest her charm be diminished," which is a fancy way of saying, "Hush, darling," or "No one will want to marry you." But there's more than silence being trained into you. Let's talk posture. Right now you're sitting on a simple oak bench at your embroidery class. You're wearing 3 layers of clothing, a chemise, a kirtle, and an outer surcoat with sleeves so wide you could smuggle loaves of bread in them. The seamstress instructor walks by her eyes, scanning your spine. Back straight, shoulders low, ankles together, hands in your lap. You nod carefully, because even nodding has rules. These rules aren't written in a textbook. They're lived into your muscles. They're taught by repetition, like learning scales on a piano, only you are the instrument. And any wrong note is visible to everyone. The reason for all this rigidity control, specifically the idea that a woman who controls her body surely controls her mind and morals. It wasn't just about looking good, it was about being morally tidy, graceful, restrained, unshakably composed. Now imagine trying to follow all these rules when you're 9 years old and still learning to not trip over your skirts. But girls were expected to begin posture training early. Manuscripts like the Book of the Knight of the Tower, written in 1372 by Geoffroy de la Tour Landry for his daughters, include whole chapters dedicated to appropriate stillness. The book encourages girls not to scratch, yawn, or shift their weight too often. One line even advises, "Let her not wriggle like a worm in the sun, for this is base and foolish to witness." Yikes! Apparently fidgeting was a moral offense. And if you think that sounds exhausting, just wait until you hear what walking was like. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We'll get to that. For now, let's linger in this moment. You're sitting silently, knees together, hands folded back, straight, dressed in wool, in a drafty stone chamber with no glass windows and no central heat. There's a basin of rose water in the corner, a reminder that you'll be expected to rinse your hands, but not splash before lunch. And that lunch will include bread. You're not supposed to chew too loudly meat. You're not supposed to cut yourself. And a goblet of wine you're only allowed to sip from once you've dabbed your lips with a linen cloth. How's that fantasy holding up? You begin to realize something. Nothing about this life is your own. Not your words, not your thoughts, not your body. Even your tears have rules. But don't worry, we'll get to those later too. Because for now, you're still in training, still being molded, still learning to become a medieval masterpiece of silence and elegance. And the question lingers, just slightly louder than a whisper. Could you actually survive this? Let's keep going. You're still with me, right? Sitting there, your back. perfectly straight, your hands politely folded, probably a little relieved that this is all imaginary and your actual spine isn't currently locked into a corset made for someone 3 inches narrower than your ribs. But we're not leaving that candlelit embroidery chamber just yet. Because while you're learning how to sit like a silent statue, there's another performance skill being drilled into you with equal seriousness, the art of walking properly. Now I know what you're thinking. Walking, really, that's the hard part. Oh, my sweet summer child. In the world of medieval etiquette, walking wasn't just walking. It was choreography. It was diplomacy. It was theater. And one misstep could mean social ruin, or at least a lecture that makes you wish you'd tripped into a moat instead. Let's rewind to the year 1340. You're 12, maybe 13, living in a well-off merchant family in northern France, perhaps Rouen or Reims. You've just been invited to a minor feast hosted by a baron's wife. Nothing too fancy. Just 30 people, 3 courses, and a strict unspoken rule book, longer than the actual Bible. Your mother takes your hand before entering the hall. Her grip is firm, not loving, more instructional. She lowers her voice to a whisper so the servants don't hear small steps. Keep your eyes down. Do not swing your arms. Glide. Glide. That's the verb she uses as if you're a ghost haunting a particularly judgmental manor. And in some ways you are. Your dress today is modest, but formal. 2 layers of heavy wool laced up the side with a thin belt cinched high across your rib cage. Underneath, a linen chemise itches your shoulders, and the long hem of your kirtle brushes the rush-covered stone floor with every shuffle. You begin your walk into the hall. Tiny, careful steps. You feel like a human broom. The floor is uneven. Your shoes are soft-soled, more like leather socks. Every creak of the wooden beams above feels like a thunderclap compared to your strained, breathless silence. Why all the drama? Because walking gracefully was seen as proof of your inner discipline. A lady who clomped through a room like an ox in a windstorm was not just clumsy, she was morally suspect. Maybe too bold, maybe too earthy, maybe not worth marrying. That's a lot of pressure for someone just trying to cross a room. The manuals of the time don't exactly sugarcoat it. In one surviving 15th century Italian etiquette guide for noble girls, it stated plainly, "Let her move," as though floating above the earth, never jarring, never showing haste. You might as well be auditioning for a ballet where nobody's allowed to enjoy themselves. Let's pause here and do a little comparison. In the modern world, you can walk into a coffee shop in flip-flops, slouching in a hoodie, holding a drink that looks like a science experiment, and still be considered put together. In medieval France, you would have been gently escorted out by someone named Marguerite, who smells like rosemary and disappointment. But let's go deeper. Let's talk why walking properly mattered so much. It all came down to marriage, that singular glittering prize that determined your worth and your entire life's trajectory. Every movement you made in public was a kind of audition for your future husband's family. Even in less formal contexts like walking through the church courtyard after Mass or crossing the town square on market day, eyes were on you. Were you composed? Were you ladylike? Were you trainable? And so girls were trained early. In noble households, it wasn't uncommon for daughters to be sent to live with another aristocratic family. From ages 7 to 14, not to study literature or arithmetic, but to master grace. Think of it like finishing school. Except, instead of learning to debate or play piano, you're learning how to walk like your joints don't bend. But just when you think it can't get any harder? Let's add clothing into the equation. The average walking outfit for a well-bred woman in 1350 included a chemise, a fitted gown with no stretch fabric, obviously an overdress with long sleeves that sometimes trailed on the ground, a belt hung with trinkets and tokens, and if the weather was cold, another mantle or cloak pinned at the chest with a brooch the size of a scone. And then the pièce de résistance, the hennin. Ah, yes, the hennin. That tall, pointy hat you've seen in fairy tale books, the one that looks like it could pick up a satellite signal. It wasn't just decorative, it was a status symbol. The taller the hennin, the higher your rank. The higher your rank, the more limited your visibility. You couldn't look sideways without risking poking someone's eye out. Your peripheral vision, gone. Your ability to look down at your feet while walking, non-existent. So now not only are you gliding across the floor like a whisper, you're doing it blind. And heaven help you if you fall. Because here's the cruel twist. While women were expected to walk like angels, the world around them was built like an obstacle course. Uneven cobblestones, muddy paths, chamber pots dumped from second-story windows, dogs, pigs, drunk minstrels. There's a reason most medieval footwear had no tread. You weren't expected to walk far anyway. You were expected to be displayed. So much so, in fact, that many noblewomen were transported short distances on carts. Not because they couldn't walk, but because walking made it harder to preserve their aura of elegance. Translation: the less people saw you struggle, the more valuable you appeared. Now back to your dinner party. You've survived the entrance. You've floated, glided, ghosted your way into your seat. You breathe a sigh of relief, but wait. The walking portion may be over, but the test never ends. One noblewoman in the Duchy of Berry once remarked, "A lady is a flame behind glass, seen but never touched, warm but never burning." That's not a metaphor. That was a life goal. In many cases, especially among wealthier classes, your actual mobility was deliberately restricted. Clothing was a form of enforced stillness. Corsets weren't as common as we imagine in the early 1300s, but girdles stiffened bodices, pinned sleeves, and long trains were plenty suffocating on their own. In some cities like Bruges or Ghent, it was fashionable to weigh dresses down with bits of lead sewn into the hems so the fabric draped properly and didn't lift in the wind. Yes, they added weights to your clothes. Fashion, darling. And once you were seated, assuming you made it there without tripping, sweating, or accidentally making eye contact with someone you weren't supposed to, your next job was to not move. Seriously. No adjusting, no scratching, no resting your chin in your hand. Fidgeting was seen as a sign of nervousness. Nervousness implied guilt. Guilt implied sin. Welcome to the logic of etiquette. So let's recap. You can't talk freely, you can't walk naturally, you can't dress comfortably, and now apparently you can't even blink too often without inviting judgment. But hey, at least dinner's coming soon, right? Oh dear. You might want to brace yourself for the next course. It's not just food on the menu, it's a full buffet of how to eat without being a social disaster. We'll get to that next. You've made it to the table. You've survived the walk, the stairs, the small talk you weren't allowed to participate in, and now, finally, you can sit. Surely this is the moment you get to relax. Right, wrong. Because in the medieval social performance that was your daily life, eating wasn't a reprieve, it was another act. And the stakes just as high. Because as a woman of status, whether noble or merely aspiring, you were expected to consume food with the grace of a saint and the self-restraint of a monk. Let's paint the scene. You're sitting at a long wooden table In a manor house outside York, circa 1380, there's a fire crackling in the hearth, tapestries fluttering with each winter draft, and 30 eyes ready to judge the way you butter your bread. You don't have a plate? Plates, at least ceramic or pewter ones, are reserved for the wealthiest guests. You share a trencher, a slab of stale bread used as an edible plate placed between you and the lady beside you. Sharing a plate sounds romantic until she dips her fingers directly into the goose sauce and casually licks them clean. And here you are trying to remember all the rules. Rule number 1. You do not ever touch food with your left hand. That's the unclean hand. Not because you've done anything scandalous with it, though, maybe, but because toilet paper doesn't exist and, well, medieval logic. Right hand only. Rule number 2. Don't reach across the table. If you can't access something easily, you wait, or you murmur a prayer of gratitude that your role in this world isn't table servant because they're darting back and forth with trenchers, knives, and bowls of stew while you pretend not to be starving. Rule number 3. Eat small bites, tiny, dainty, mouse-like. Chew quietly. No open-mouth chewing, no crunching. Definitely no slurping. Your goal is to consume without being perceived. Like a food thief in a heist movie, only the jewels are your dignity. Your fellow diners are no better. The men are laughing, tearing at drumsticks, with the confidence of people who've never had to worry about marrying up. The older women are nodding at you in approval or disapproval. It's hard to tell. Medieval eyebrows were shaved off and redrawn anyway, so everyone kind of looks vaguely surprised. Now here's a fun twist. You're not supposed to look too eager when food is served. That signals gluttony. But you're also not supposed to look disinterested because that implies ingratitude. You're walking the tightrope between hungry and holy, and there's no net. This balancing act is especially absurd once you realize what's on offer. A typical noble meal in the late 14th century might include roast meats, pies, stewed vegetables, and something called blanc mange, which is not as fancy as it sounds. Think shredded chicken boiled in milk and thickened with rice, kind of like wet meat pudding. Yummy. And yet you must look delighted. Not too delighted, just serenely pleased. Like a woman in a perfume ad who just smelled roasted pigeon. Before each bite, you're meant to dab your lips with a napkin if one's provided. If not, the back of your hand must do. You never lick your fingers. That's reserved for peasants and men named Geoffrey, who just returned from a hunt. And when it comes to wine, oh boy. You'd think a glass of wine would be a relief. But no, it's another performance. Your goblet is filled only part way, just enough for a polite sip. You hold it delicately with 3 fingers, pinky slightly raised, not too high. You're not a caricature. And you sip after wiping your mouth. Then you set it down gently without clinking. Clinking is for revelers and bards. You are neither. At some dinners, especially in noble courts like those of Burgundy or Savoy, there were 2 types of wines, served one spiced, one not. You were expected to know the difference, choose appropriately, and react as if you had opinions, but mild ones. You're not a sommelier. You're a delicate flower. Meanwhile, a servant is walking around with a bowl of rose water for hand washing. You're meant to extend your hands. Palms down, fingers together, and let the water trickle without splashing. Then someone offers a small cloth to dry them. If no one does, you air dry, like a forgotten lettuce leaf. This was not just dining. This was an etiquette obstacle course, where the punishment for failure wasn't physical, it was social death. You could be gossiped about for weeks if you tore bread too loudly, Or worse, laughed too freely? Yes, laughter. But we'll get to that. Right now, you're still locked in this slow motion meal, trying to make your fingers behave, your chewing invisible, your desire to slouch, vanish into thin air. And that's hard to do when you're eating, sitting on a bench with no backrest for the past hour and a half. Let's break for a little story, shall we? There's an account from the English court in the 1420s during a feast honoring a visiting bishop. A young noblewoman, unnamed in the record but clearly important, accidentally dropped her spoon. Not once, twice. Rather than retrieve it herself, she waited for a servant. But the servant, flustered and juggling 5 other tasks, ignored her. The young woman, trying to follow the rules, waited longer. The bishop noticed. He smiled. The young woman flushed red with shame. In her mind, that single dropped spoon had cost her an entire year of social standing. Was she overreacting, perhaps? But in a world where reputation was your only currency, even a spoon could bankrupt you. Let's bring it back to you. You finish your meat pie. You've dabbed, chewed, swallowed with priest-like grace. And now dessert arrives, candied fruits and a thick slab of honeyed almond paste. It smells divine. It's sticky. Dangerous. A test. You manage to bite into it without it pulling a molar out. Success? Just then, someone beside you tells a joke, a genuinely funny one. The kind that in modern times might earn a wheeze laugh and a forehead slap. But here you cover your mouth. You smile politely. You give the quietest little giggle, a sound more like a squirrel hiccuping than a laugh. Because laughing too loudly is indecorous. And decorum is everything. You survive the meal, you've passed another test. But don't relax just yet. Next up, you'll learn that even the way you stand in a room full of people has been mapped out centuries before you were born. And your hands, oh sweet summer child, you're using them all wrong. You're full, not just with food though, yes. The honeyed almond paste is now sitting in your stomach like a velvet-coated brick, but with the sheer exhaustion of trying to be the perfect woman for yet another hour of your medieval existence. And just when you think it's finally time to excuse yourself, maybe even let out the tiniest post-meal sigh, a new realization dawns: you don't know what to do with your hands. You're standing now at the edge of the hall, surrounded by other ladies and gentlemen in various stages of performative grace. Some are engaged in hushed conversation. Some are simply standing like decorative vases. And you are standing incorrectly. You realize it when a matron with cheeks like curdled milk gives you a look, a slow, deliberate up and down that says, "Sweet child, what are you doing with those elbows? Let's fix that." In the 15th century court of Burgundy, and in most noble circles across Europe, the proper way for a woman to stand was as follows: feet together, toes slightly angled out, not too much, we're not duck walking here, spine straight, shoulders soft, chin down just a touch. And this is crucial: hands clasped gently at the waist or folded just below the bust. Let them hang at your sides. You look like a scarecrow. Cross them, you look combative. Rest them on your hips. You might as well be starting a bar fight. Know your hands are the punctuation marks of your existence. They express everything you're not allowed to say. And in a world where you're expected to say almost nothing, that makes your hands practically dangerous. So dangerous, in fact, that entire sections of medieval etiquette books are dedicated to hand management. One 14th century English manuscript includes a passage instructing young ladies not to fan their fingers like idle maidens and to avoid twiddling or twitching as it betrays a restless mind and a wayward spirit. Yes, fidgeting was interpreted as a spiritual flaw. You wonder briefly if your 21st century habit of nervously tapping your fingers on a tabletop would have had you exorcised. But let's not dwell on the consequences just yet. Instead, let's look at the kinds of gestures that were allowed. You could use a single hand to lightly touch your chest when acknowledging a compliment. Offer a hand, never both, to help lift a child or accept a letter. Fold your hands when being addressed by a superior or husband. Use them to hold a rosary or embroidery hoop. Always good props for moral superiority. But you could not point, that was masculine. Clap, that was theatrical. Snap, that didn't even exist in polite company. Touch another person unless absolutely necessary. And certainly not a man outside your family. Oh, and if your hands were dirty, that wasn't just rude, it was scandalous. Medieval hygiene was more nuanced than we give it credit for. While people weren't bathing daily, hand washing was a major ritual, especially for women. Before and after meals and upon entering or leaving a chapel, you were expected to wash your hands with rose water, lavender water, or simple herbal infusions. This wasn't just about cleanliness. It was about symbolism, purity, grace. In some noble houses, the hand-washing ritual was even performed in front of guests like a little holy ceremony. A servant would pour water from a ewer into a basin, while another offered a fine linen cloth. You had to keep your fingers aligned, let the water cascade gracefully, then pat, not rub your hands dry. Imagine performing that with the same quiet reverence people today reserve for engagement, ring unboxings on Instagram. And all of this just to make sure your hands wouldn't offend someone at dinner. Let's keep going. Now that you're aware of your posture, your hands, your silence, and your social danger levels, you might be wondering, what if I just express emotion? What if I just let something show? Let's try something small, something human. Let's say someone you care about just shared a tender story. Or you saw something beautiful, a candle flickering on a stained glass window, a dog curled up under a table, a child giggling softly. You smile, but wait, is your smile too big? In many parts of medieval Europe, especially in elite settings, women were expected to maintain a modest mirth. That's not a phrase invented by a greeting card company, it's a survival tactic. Smiling was good, but only the right kind. A soft, closed-mouth smile. Not toothy, not overly eager, not the kind of smile that says, I have a thought I'd like to share. Just a Mona Lisa smile, a mystery, a gesture of peace. Laughter, that was a whole separate issue. In 1375, a collection of etiquette poems from France warned that a woman whose teeth are often bared in laughter may as well open her bedchamber too. Oof. Translation, big laugh. Judge, big scandal. You could laugh, but quietly, while covering your mouth, and never ever at something ribald. That word comes up a lot in medieval documents. It basically means funny but impolite, which covers about 97% of modern humor. This obsession with modesty extended to the crying department too. Tears were expected in 2 places during funerals. During religious devotion. But even there, rules applied. You couldn't sob, you couldn't wail, you certainly couldn't throw yourself onto the coffin or altar. No mascara-streaked drama here. Not that they had mascara, of course. Instead, gentle weeping was the goal. A tear slipping down the cheek. 1 or 2 sniffles. Enough to show you were tender-hearted but not unstable. Too many tears. You lacked self-control. Too few, you were cold. Too noisy, you were indecent. Too silent, you might be plotting something. It's a tightrope act, isn't it? A constant tension between being noticed just enough but never too much. And here's where it gets darkly ironic. The very culture that expected you to exist quietly also held the power to explode your reputation over the smallest breach of that silence. A whispered comment, a curious question, an enthusiastic laugh. All of it could lead to gossip, to reputational rot, to stories that outlived you. Because while medieval women were silenced in life, they were often loud in legend, usually as cautionary tales. She was too forward, she was clever but not wise. She forgot herself. That last one. It didn't mean she misplaced her purse. It meant she forgot her place. And in the eyes of society, that was the ultimate failure. So here you are, standing in a room full of lace and rules, trying to fold your hands just right. Smile just enough, walk without stumbling, speak without actually saying anything, and somehow remain charming through it all. And the wildest part, you haven't even left the house yet. Tomorrow you'll have to do it all again, this time at church, where the pews are harder, the rules stricter, and the stakes eternal. But for now, let's pause. Take a breath. Shake out those fingers you've been holding in fake medieval elegance for far too long. You deserve it. Hey, are you still with me, or did you drift off somewhere between the rosewater finger baths and the silent, smiling instructions? That's okay. This is a safe place for nodding off. But if your eyes are still open, blinking slowly, like a medieval maiden who spent 6 hours trying not to drop a spoon, then let's continue. Gently, quietly, and as always with perfectly composed posture. Because today, my dear dinner survivor, we're going to church. And if you thought the dinner table was full of unspoken rules, well, imagine that, but holy, with incense and eyes. Lots and lots of eyes. It's Sunday morning, the year is 1437, and you're standing in the doorway of a stone chapel in rural Normandy. The bell has just finished its slow echoing toll. The air smells like wet stone and beeswax, and you, perfectly dressed with your head covered in a fine linen wimple, are preparing to enter God's house, which, if we're honest, feels a little like God's etiquette exam room. Let's go over the checklist. Step 1, your entrance. You must walk in slowly, reverently. You may not run, skip, or shiver. You must pass through the doors like you're gliding into a cloud of incense eyes cast downward, not in shame, but in holy humility. Step 2, your seating. You don't just plop down in any pew. Oh no. There's an invisible seating chart based entirely on your husband's status, your father's land holdings, whether your family donated candles to the altar this season, and of course your silence track record. You find your bench third from the front, just behind Lady Martinet, whose husband once paid for half the bell tower, and you kneel first. Always kneel before sitting. Bonus points for making the sign of the cross with exacting slowness, like you're drawing calligraphy in the air. And now, you sit. But careful, there's a right way to sit in church. Back straight always. Ankles tucked beneath the bench. Knees never apart. Hands folded, not interlocked. That's too casual. And whatever you do, don't let your veil slip. A woman's hair, if shown in church, was considered a disruption, a temptation. Some theologians compared it to loose parchment inviting blasphemous scribbles. So yeah, keep that linen tight. You listen to the Latin Mass. You don't understand much. That's fine, nobody really does except the priests. But you're expected to look like you do. Nodding gently, closing your eyes at the right moments, crossing yourself with choreographed grace. Sometimes your mind wanders to the sunlight trickling through stained glass, to the goose feathers poking through your bodice lining, to whether your shoes squeaked a little too loudly earlier, to whether your husband noticed that you forgot to bow your head after the Sanctus, to whether God noticed. And then you remember you're being watched, not just by heaven, by everyone, because medieval church wasn't just a religious experience, it was a social performance in sacred clothing. You were evaluated on everything, how you sang or didn't, how low you bowed, whether you cried at the appropriate moments, whether your hands stayed still during sermons, whether you brought your own psalter, or worse, borrowed your neighbor's. And if you brought children good luck, one sniffle too loud from your toddler, and suddenly you're the subject of village gossip for a week. She doesn't control her child. She's too soft. She let him chew the edge of her prayer book. Scandalous. Let's talk about crying for a second. Yes, again. Because church was one of the only places a woman could openly show emotion, and even then, only certain kinds. You could weep during communion. That was noble. You could weep while praying for a dead relative. That was touching. You could weep during Passion Week. That was practically mandatory. But you couldn't sob or moan or clutch your chest in agony. That was seen as performative and attention-seeking. A proper church cry involved one tear, a soft exhale, a very delicate dab with the corner of your sleeve or a cloth, and never ever let the tear roll past your jawline. If it touched your neck, you were being dramatic. There's a story from 1412 recorded in a village near Cologne about a woman named Brigitte who actually cried during a sermon about Mary Magdalene. She sobbed, shook, wailed. The priest paused. A baby started crying in sympathy. A candle went out. Brigitte was asked not to return the next Sunday. Because holiness? That's good. But messiness, that's disruptive. Let's also talk about what you wear to church. Because your outfit is not about comfort. It's about class. It's about keeping up with the other women whose husbands trade wool for silver and whose sons attend Latin school. You're wearing a dress made from tightly woven wool, dyed with plant-based pigments that cost your household 3 chickens and a goose last season. Your sleeves are long, almost to the fingertips, and your belt is decorated with a few trinkets, a rosary, a sewing charm, and a small leather-bound prayer book you mostly use as a hand prop. Your veil is pinned in place with brass fasteners. Underneath your hair is braided tightly, almost painfully, to ensure it doesn't puff the veil unnaturally. And your shoes, wooden-soled pattens, lifted off the muddy street by about an inch. Heavy, clunky, and guaranteed to make every step echo like a sin. And what about communion? Ah, yes, the Eucharist. A sacred moment. A silent choreography. You kneel, you keep your eyes lowered, you open your mouth only when prompted, you do not speak, you do not reach for the chalice, you do not let your tongue linger, and you definitely do not chew the host. Swallow. Don't cough. Don't sneeze. Don't blink too loudly. When it's over, you cross yourself again perfectly and shuffle back to your seat with the silence of a shadow. By the time the Mass ends, you're physically still, but emotionally drained. You've said almost nothing. You've smiled 3 times. You've dabbed at imaginary tears. You've stood, sat, knelt, stood, sat, knelt again. You've held your veil in place like your soul depended on it. And you've walked out of the church with the grace of someone who hasn't unclenched their jaw in 2 hours. You wonder, was that faith or just more theater? You wonder, did the priest notice you weren't kneeling quite as deeply this week? You wonder, is God as obsessed with linen as everyone else seems to be? And then a surprising thing happens as you pass the churchyard gates. an older woman smiles at you. Genuinely, no trace of judgment, no evaluation, just a smile. You nod back silently, because even here, that's all you're allowed to do. But in that moment, it feels enough. For now, are you still there? Or have the medieval linen rules finally rocked you into sweet unconsciousness? Either way, we'll continue when you're ready. You made it out of church. Barely. Your feet hurt. Your veil is slightly askew, and your internal monologue has now adopted a prayerful tone, mostly because you're praying no one noticed the way you almost sneezed during communion. But don't get too comfortable. You're not heading home to slip into anything cozy, because next on the medieval itinerary is something just as sacred, just as rule-bound, and somehow even more exhausting than religious ritual, the afternoon social call. Yes, the great medieval tradition of going visiting, which sounds light and breezy until you realize that visiting another woman's home was basically a live performance of everything you were supposed to be: composed, attentive, and most importantly, inoffensive in every possible way. It's now early afternoon in a small town near Bruges. The sun is high, the air smells faintly of damp hay and overcooked turnips, and you've just arrived at Lady Annalise's house with your mother-in-law. She's already told you twice to let her do the talking, which is medieval for "don't embarrass me." You step over the threshold, careful not to scuff the wooden floor with your pattens. A servant takes your cloak. You nod a silent, grateful nod, not a "I just remembered your name" kind of nod, and are shown into the receiving room. This room, unlike the kitchen or the servants' quarters, is meant entirely for display. Think of it as a cross between a parlor and a fashion magazine spread. Everything is clean, slightly perfumed, and utterly terrifying. You are offered a seat on a bench, not too plush, not too plain. You're handed a small cup of warm, spiced wine. And then the waiting begins. This is where the rules really start to bloom like awkward flowers of discomfort. Rule 1. Don't speak first. The hostess must open the conversation, even if there's an awkward silence. Even if someone just coughed the word weather into the void and nobody responded, you must wait. Eventually, Lady Annalisa does speak. She asks your mother-in-law about her son's recent wool exports. You listen politely, hands folded in your lap, knees tilted slightly to the left, never straight forward, too bold. You nod, smile faintly, and resist the urge to look out the window at the dog chasing a goose in the street, even though it's objectively the most exciting thing happening. Rule 2. Never interrupt, even to agree, even to clarify, even to say, "Yes, that reminds me of something similar." No. You wait until the other person has stopped speaking for at least 2 full heartbeats, and even then only speak if your mother-in-law gives you the nod. This nod is subtle, a slight lift of the chin, a glance that says, "You may enter the arena, but if you mess this up, I will pretend not to know you." You get the nod, you speak, you say something polite, something safe, maybe about the weather, or a recent sermon, or the unusually nice dye job on the table runner. And then you return to listening mode, because most of a medieval visit wasn't talking, it was watching. Watching how people sat, how they held their cups, how often they blinked, whether their hands twitched during tense moments, whether they laughed too easily or not at all. This brings us to Rule 3, laughing. We've talked about this before. But now you're in a social space, not a sacred one. So the rules shift. Slightly, you can laugh. In fact, you're expected to. Just not loudly. and only at things that are already vaguely humorous. If someone makes a joke at another woman's expense and you laugh too hard, you're cruel. If you don't laugh at all, you're uptight. The trick is to laugh like you're gently brushing a feather off your soul. And always, always cover your mouth with your fingertips when you do it. There's a poem from late 14th century Toulouse that describes the perfect lady's laugh as a tinkling of distant bells muffled in velvet.
No one has any idea what that actually sounds like, but good luck trying to imitate it. Meanwhile, food is sometimes served. Tiny snacks, a piece of almond cake, a bit of quince jelly, a sliver of cheese so thin it might as well be a rumor. You don't ask for seconds. You never ask for seconds. As you nibble delicately, you are expected to also nod in agreement with whatever is being said, regardless of whether you agree or not. You're a mirror, not a participant. Your job is to reflect good manners, not create ripples. Unless, of course, you're a widow. Let's take a moment to acknowledge that widows, especially wealthy ones, operated under slightly different rules. Freed from the direct control of husbands, some widows wielded considerable power in court and business. They could speak more freely, laugh more easily, even host events without male chaperones. But for now, you're not a widow. You're a daughter-in-law, which is like being in the medieval witness protection program, always present, never loud. You're now entering the danger zone of the visit the polite gossip phase. This is when someone, usually the hostess, brings up a recent scandal or curiosity, a neighbor who married beneath her station, a servant caught napping, a new merchant with suspiciously soft hands. Your job, react appropriately, not too excited, not too shocked, just the right amount of concerned curiosity. A raised brow, a soft murmur, perhaps a whispered, "Oh, how unfortunate." Underreact and you seem cold. Overreact and you seem petty. React correctly and you're a genius of social navigation. Eventually the visit winds down. You rise from your seat slowly, carefully, and thank the hostess. Not too effusively. That would seem desperate. Just one small bow of the head and "Your kindness is as lovely as your wine." You leave with your mother-in-law, and the second the door closes behind you, you exhale. Not just because it's over, but because now you can finally move your face again. As you walk home, you replay every detail of the visit like a post-mortem. Did you sit straight enough? Did you nod too often? Did your laugh sound like muffled velvet bells or just a tiny sneeze? Your mother-in-law says nothing. That's probably a good sign. When you return home, you finally collapse onto the edge of your bed, still in full dress, of course. You stare at the wooden beams above. You consider taking off your veil, but you don't because someone might knock on the door, because propriety is never really over, because even in your own house you're still performing. And the wildest part, there are still rules for sleepwear. But let's save that for another night. For now, close your eyes. You've survived another performance. You've played the part. You've whispered through a world that asks everything of you and gives you no applause. And tomorrow we do it all again. Night falls, finally. The streets quiet. The hearth crackles low. The church bells fall silent. And the stars scatter across the sky like spilled barley on a chapel floor. And you're still in costume. Not a theatrical costume, though it might as well be. No, you're in your second best kirtle, still laced up tight with your hair, still braided beneath that linen coif you haven't dared remove. Because bedtime, like everything else in your medieval life, is not the end of performance. It is simply a quieter act in a never-ending play. Let's talk about how medieval women were expected to go to bed.
Now I know what you're imagining. You think of bedtime as soft, warm, a wool blanket, and maybe a wooden spoon of porridge before tucking yourself in beside a sleepy cat. But no, not here, not now, not if you want to remain respectable. You're living in the year 1452 in a merchant-class home near Ghent. The walls are timbered, the floors creak with every step. You share your room with your youngest sister and one increasingly judgmental grandmother. Your bed is a wooden frame stuffed with straw, covered by a sackcloth. Tick stuffed with feathers if you're lucky, or with whatever didn't smell too bad. If you're not, your blanket, it's wool, heavy, scratchy, definitely not washed since Michaelmas. And the pillow, one shared, lumpy, possibly filled with crushed reeds. Smells like ancestral regret. But before you even reach the bed, there's a bedtime ritual. First, you change into your night clothes, which are neither soft nor flattering. A long linen shift, possibly the same one you wore under your gown all day, is now your sleepwear. It's modest, always long-sleeved, often itchy, and never ever allowed to be seen by any man except your husband, if you have one. Even brothers are off limits for this glimpse. Second, you unpin your veil, but not your entire headdress. Most women slept with their hair braided and covered to prevent it from becoming wild. And wild hair. That was the visual metaphor for sin. So yes, you must sleep like a nun, but make it fashion. You sit on the edge of the bed and recite your night prayers. These aren't optional, they're required. A small psalter may sit at your bedside, or perhaps you recite them from memory. You cross yourself. You whisper words to protect your soul, in case you die in your sleep, which was honestly always on the table. Pneumonia, fever, chimney smoke, falling beams, a pig getting loose in the night and trampling you in the dark. Medieval sleep wasn't peaceful. It was survival mode with a blanket. Now here's the fun part. You didn't just sleep once per night. No, medieval folks often slept in 2 shifts, what scholars call first sleep and second sleep. You'd go to bed around sunset, sleep a few hours, wake up around midnight for an hour or two, during which you might pray, whisper, eat a cold bite of turnip, and then fall asleep again until dawn. So yes, even your rest was interrupted, rhythmically, culturally, religiously. And what happens if you share a bed? Let's talk about bed sharing. In most homes, especially in colder towns, you didn't sleep alone. Even married couples didn't always have a bed to themselves. Siblings bunked together, servants shared mattresses. Entire families might curl up on a raised wooden platform like peas in a pod of very bad breath. And that closeness, it came with rules too. No talking after prayer. The idea was to drift off in holy silence. No turning your back to the crucifix. If there was one hanging in the room, and there usually was, it had to face the most honorable sleeper. No facing the window. That was considered disrespectful to the angels who might pass. Feet must not poke out from the blanket, because the devil, they said, tugs at uncovered toes. You laugh, but quietly. That last one actually appears in a 15th century English household manual. Apparently demonic toe-tugging was a common fear. That and bed bugs. But let's not open that nightmare just yet. So you lie still, hands folded, eyes closed. Your sister breathes evenly beside you. Your grandmother mumbles in her sleep about St. Martha. You stare at the rafters. You count the knots in the wood. You try to sleep, but your mind is restless. You begin to review the day. Did I sit properly at the banquet? Did I smile too long at that merchant's son? Did I walk too quickly in the churchyard? Did I laugh? Was it too much? This is what keeps you awake. Not existential dread or unpaid taxes, just the infinite loop of social self-correction. Even now, even as you drift into dreams, you're still performing. And then something happens. A sound in the night. A door creaks. A clatter in the courtyard. Maybe it's just the wind, or a servant fetching water,
or a pig doing pig things in the dark, but your body tenses. Because here's a secret. Women were never entirely safe, not even in bed, and especially not alone. That's why prayers were so important, why beds had locks, why the psalter was kept under the pillow. Not for reading, for protection. There's a word bedward that medieval English used to describe going to sleep, but it didn't mean to rest. It meant to guard. Bed was not a sanctuary. It was a checkpoint. Eventually the sound fades. You unclench your hands. Your eyes flutter closed. You begin your first sleep. And somewhere in that fog between waking and dreaming, you imagine yourself not in wool and wood, but in a place with cotton sheets, electric lights, private bedrooms, no rules about laughter or toe coverage, and a pillow that doesn't judge you. But then a rooster crows. Your eyes snap open. It's morning again, and the performance resumes. The rooster's crow doesn't just wake you. It summons you, like a tiny feathered bishop announcing the first act of a very long play that shrill cock-a-doodle-doo cuts through the chill morning air and informs everyone within earshot that it's time to be respectable again. You stir beneath your wool blanket. Your back aches, your hair braided and pinned overnight like a bundle of medieval shame has left divots in your scalp. You can already smell the faint smoke of the kitchen fire being rekindled, the sourness of leftover barley porridge, and the faint but ever-present tang of unwashed wool. And you haven't even stood up yet. This morning, like every morning, comes with its own set of rules. Because remember, in the medieval world, how you wake up matters. How quickly, how quietly, how devoutly. You're expected to greet the day with reverence, discipline, and not even the slightest trace of bedhead rebellion. So before you can stretch or yawn, both mildly scandalous if done with enthusiasm, you begin your morning prayers. Still lying down, hands crossed over your chest, you recite memorized Latin phrases through dry lips and frozen breath. Domine labia mea aperis. Lord, open my lips. This isn't personal, it's ritual, a shield against everything from gossip to gout. Medieval people didn't just pray out of faith, they prayed out of fear. Fear of illness, famine, neighbors, devils, demons, and yes, even being caught yawning with your mouth wide open. Once your soul is officially logged on, you rise. Slowly, carefully. The bed creaks beneath you like it's filing a complaint. Your shift is wrinkled and smells faintly of cabbage. But it's linen and it's intact, and that's more than most people in town can claim. Time to begin. Let's talk morning hygiene, which is generous terminology considering the situation. You move to a small wooden basin set near the window. There's water in it, cold, slightly gray, poured from a pitcher that looks like it's seen better centuries. You dip your hands in. You splash your face. You gasp. No soap. Not yet. Soap is used sparingly and only when there's visible grime or a holy day approaching. For now, it's just water and the hope that rubbing it around will convince others you're clean. Your teeth, not brushed. But maybe you chew a sprig of mint if you're fancy, or rub your gums with a bit of wool cloth dipped in vinegar if you're not. Bad breath exists, but so does universal acceptance of it. Everyone smells faintly of onions and quiet desperation. Your hair is unbraided, but not all the way.
You must rebraid it in sections, smoothing each lock with your fingers and pinning it up in the exact same pattern as yesterday. Consistency is key. If you change your style too often, people will talk. And fashionable is one half step away from frivolous, which is one sneeze away from sinful.
Finally, you put on your gown. It's the same one as yesterday, because it's the only one you own that doesn't have a hole in the hem or mysterious stew stains down the front. You tie the laces carefully, cinch the belt loosely, never tightly. It's considered vain, and layer your cloak over your shoulders. It's chilly out, but fashion dictates modest discomfort. Your shoes, soft leather. They were your mother's. You've resoled them 3 times, and they still make that gentle squish sound every time you step in the wrong spot near the hearth. Now let's go downstairs. The kitchen is already humming with quiet chaos. A servant girl is kneading dough by candlelight. Someone's churning butter in the corner. Your aunt is muttering about the firewood being too damp. A child sneezes somewhere. No one says, "Bless you." That's not scheduled until Mass. Your task this morning? Domestic labor with dignity. Not scrubbing floors or hauling buckets. That's for lower status women, but something lighter. Something more performative. You're asked to help prepare herbs, a chore that looks delicate, smells nice, and won't ruin your hands. Because in the medieval world, a woman's hands are a resume. Rough palms mean poverty. Smooth fingers mean virtue. Calluses mean you've failed to marry well. You sort lavender and rosemary, crushing them gently in a mortar that's chipped on one side. You'll use these herbs later to scent the linens or the wash water, or if you're lucky, to steep into a tea that masks the flavor of the barley porridge you're about to choke down. And speaking of breakfast, let's set the record straight. Medieval breakfast was not brunch. No eggs Benedict, no croissants, no espresso. Just whatever was left from last night's meal, reheated and repurposed. You might have a crust of rye bread, slightly stale, some cheese if you're lucky, a cup of ale, weak and warm and vaguely bitter, or that eternal staple porridge, a grayish sludge made from grains and hope. You eat quickly, quietly, no talking at breakfast unless addressed, no chewing with enthusiasm, no complaints, just tiny bites and large humility. After breakfast, you move into the mid-morning tasks. This is the heart of the day, where women's labor and women's reputation dance the most dangerous waltz. You're sent to the town square. Not to shop, oh no. You're not a peasant or a servant. You don't haggle, you observe. You're walking with your mother or your aunt or another chaperone, and your job is to be seen, not noticed, seen. You walk with short, precise steps. Your eyes are downcast. Your hands are folded or tucked beneath your sleeves. If you pass someone you know, you nod, but only once. A second nod would be excessive. A wave, barbaric. This outing is not for fun. It's surveillance. You're checking who's ill, who's pregnant, who has a new cloak, who's talking to whom. Every interaction is a stitch in the social fabric of your world, and you are expected to memorize the pattern. You stop briefly at the apothecary, not to buy anything, but to ask a question. Something vague and polite, maybe about licorice root, maybe about ointments for dry skin. You don't need anything. You just want the apothecary's wife to remember your face. Then you return home, you help sew, you mend socks, you rewrap the wool that's been unraveling by the hearth. You practice your embroidery, tiny perfect stitches in tiny perfect patterns. a swan, a vine, a cross. You do this for hours. And if you're wondering why medieval women didn't lead revolutions or invent more things or escape their households and write epic novels, it's because they were too busy trying to thread needles in bad lighting while remembering not to breathe too loudly. Finally, it's noon. The church bells ring again. You stop, cross yourself, whisper a prayer, look out the window, and for a brief second, just one, you wonder what it would be like to run. Not forever, just for an afternoon. To kick off your shoes, to let your veil fall, to raise your arms and laugh loudly, to jump into the stream behind the baker's house, to feel the wind on your neck and not wonder if it's immodest. But then someone calls your name. Your sister needs help with the firewood. Your aunt needs a bucket fetched. Your uncle's cloak needs brushing before supper. So you nod, you fold your hands, and you go. Because you're a woman in the Middle Ages, and the day isn't over yet. Fan 9. It's late afternoon now. The sun has slipped lower in the sky, casting slanted beams of gold through the leaded glass windows, if you're lucky enough to live in a house with windows. Otherwise, it's just dusty light leaking between wooden shutters and the faintest hint of warmth lingering from the midday sun. Either way, the golden hour in the medieval world doesn't mean a selfie. It means another round of social expectations now, with longer shadows and slightly more hunger, because it's almost supper time. But before we get to the evening meal, we need to talk about a ritual even older, even more socially binding than breaking bread, the art of waiting to eat. You don't eat when you're hungry. You eat when it's appropriate. When the bell tolls, when the men return, when the lady of the house lifts her spoon, and not a moment before. Let's rewind a bit. The chores are done for now. You've spent the afternoon in what can only be described as a polite hustle, helping sort beans, refolding cloth that didn't need folding, and pretending not to overhear a whispered disagreement between your aunt and the neighbor over whose daughter is more suitable for that poor merchant's son with a decent smile and 2 goats. As the shadows lengthen, you and the other women begin to prepare the evening table. And prepare doesn't mean just placing food. It means rewashing hands in scented water,
Setting out trenchers, the flat rounds of bread that will double as plates. Lighting candles.
wiping down the table with a cloth dampened in vinegar and herbs. Everything is done slowly, deliberately, ritualistically, because supper isn't just about nourishment, it's about order, hierarchy, control. This is when the men return. They've been outside managing fields, bartering, mending fences, or more likely standing around talking about doing those things. They enter the home with the confidence of people who don't have to count how many times they blink during the day. Their voices fill the room. They remove cloaks, shake off dust, ask what's for supper without really expecting an answer. You smile politely. You nod. You fold your hands. You lower your gaze. Because this next part is crucial. You do not sit at the table yet. In many households, particularly those where rank and lineage are well documented and loudly discussed, women serve the meal before joining it. You carry the pots. You ladle the stew. You slice the bread. You bring the wine, not too much, just enough for everyone to toast the saint of the day. And then when the head of the household gestures or says, "Now, ladies, only then may you sit," but don't slump, don't sigh, don't show that you're already dreaming of your straw-filled mattress. Let's talk about the actual food. Tonight's meal, like most, is simple but carefully prepared. You might have a barley stew with root vegetables,
A small portion of dried or salted meat beef or pork, rarely chicken unless it's a feast day. Black bread dense and sour cut into rough hunks.
maybe a wedge of cheese if the cow cooperated this week.
A jug of small ale, low alcohol, safer than water, barely satisfying.
Everything is served in bowls, and on the aforementioned trenchers, those slices of stale bread designed to soak up the juices of the meal. At the end, the trenchers may be eaten, fed to dogs, or if you're really fancy, given to the poor as a form of charity. But again, it's not what's served, it's how you behave while consuming it. Small bites, chewing with lips closed, wiping hands before and after each course, never licking fingers, never biting into bread directly, always tear it first. And conversation, yes. You may speak softly if addressed. You may offer a quiet observation about the meal, a humble compliment to the cook, or a brief tale about a local happening if it's sufficiently mild. You may not complain, criticize, interrupt, tell jokes that involve bodily functions. Laughter is allowed, but only the contained, graceful kind. Remember our old friend, the tinkling of distant bells, muffled in velvet. Yes, she's back. If you laugh too hard and wine spills from your nose, well, you might as well move to another village, or become a nun, or both. Now perhaps someone begins to sing, not loudly, just a soft, rhythmic melody about the harvest, or a hymn in honor of a saint. Music was common at evening meals, and women were encouraged to know a few tunes. You're expected to join in harmony on key and at the correct tempo. You hum, you smile, you count how many bites you've taken so far to ensure you're not eating faster than the others. Eventually the meal ends, not with dessert, not with espresso, just with a final sip of ale, a polite murmur of thanks, and the sound of spoons being gathered. Clean up. That's you. You clear the bowls, you shake out the cloth, you scrape the trenchers into a bucket. And if you think that's the hard part, no. The hardest part comes next, the evening social time, also known as the longest hour of pretending you're interested in embroidery patterns. The men linger near the hearth, discussing trade oxen politics. The women gather in a cluster and bring out their sewing. This is not optional. This is not leisure. This is a continuation of performance. You stitch, you nod, you smile, you pretend your back doesn't hurt, you act like you care deeply about whether silk thread holds color better than dyed flax. You agree that yes, Dame Marjorie's stitches are more refined this year. You absolutely do not mention that you saw Dame Marjorie drop a piece of cheese into her sleeve earlier and eat it during prayers. You are calm, you are quiet, you are flawless. And that's when the danger arrives. Innocently. From across the room, someone says, "Tell us a story." Everyone looks around, then someone says your name. Now you're panicking. You're not supposed to refuse, but you're also not supposed to brag. You must deliver a tale that's interesting but not too dramatic, funny but not inappropriate, moral but not preachy, and short, always short. You clear your throat. You begin to tell a story about a fox in a monastery garden, or a child who learned patience from a goat, or a saint who baked bread with her tears. Everyone listens. You keep your voice low, you avoid eye contact, you deliver the last line with the faintest upward inflection, and then you fold your hands. They nod. Success. You are still acceptable. You are still safe. The fire burns lower, the candles flicker, someone yawns, and for the first time since sunrise, your shoulders relax, just slightly. Supper's over. Social time is done. Bed awaits. But don't worry, there are rules for that too. We'll get there. For now, take a breath. You made it through another meal without scandal. Just don't forget to rebraid your hair before sleep.
So here we are again. The candles have been snuffed. The coals in the hearth glow red like tired eyes slowly closing. The wooden beams overhead creak as the wind nudges the thatched roof. You're back in your room, or rather, the room, because your room implies a luxury that only exists in romance novels and castles. And no castles don't have central heating either. You've survived the entire day. From the moment the rooster barked you out of sleep to the mind-numbing embroidery hour after supper. You did everything right, or at least you avoided catastrophe. You managed your hands, your mouth, your laugh, your spoon, and your soul. And now finally you can fall into bed and... oh no, wait, you forgot the rosary. Because of course even sleep begins with structure. Tonight, like every night, you recite your evening devotions. Not too fast, not too slow, not too theatrical. This isn't a stage, it's a sanctuary. Your voice is a whisper in the dark, a feather brushing the silence. You pray for health, forgiveness, your father's gout, the neighbor's lost goat, that one time you smiled too long at the cooper's son. You pray because you don't know if you'll wake up. And in the medieval world, people really didn't pretend otherwise. Sleep was dangerous, mysterious. It was called the little death, and for good reason. If you died in your sleep, your soul would be judged based on the last thing you said, did, or thought. So naturally, you tried to go to sleep with a prayer on your lips and your feet tucked neatly under the blanket. No loose ends, no exposed toes. You lie down, and the ritual continues. Tonight, you're sleeping with your sister again. Not because you love her company, but because there's only one bed. A wooden frame stuffed with straw, padded with whatever blankets haven't been turned into cloaks or curtains. The mattress sags in the middle like it's trying to swallow your dignity. It smells faintly of age wool and everyone who's ever slept here before. You face the wall. She faces the other wall. No talking. Not unless something's on fire. No shifting too much. It's disrespectful. No kicking. No hogging the blanket. No dreaming too loud. Yes, that's a thing. In some households, if you were overheard mumbling in your sleep, it was considered a sign of spiritual unrest. A guilty conscience, a demon whispering into your ear. Some girls were even given dried herbs to place under their pillows, not for nightmares, but to silence them, because even in dreams you're expected to behave. And then, just as you start to drift off, you feel it, a soft tickle on your ankle. You freeze, you hope it's straw. It's not, it's a flea, or a louse, or something else that isn't paying rent, because bed bugs were not a joke. They were a way of life. In fact, in many homes, especially in towns where water was scarce and soap was sacred, beds were known to be infested. That's why some people kept bed curfew herbs, bundles of rosemary, wormwood, or lavender, tied to the bedposts, not for romance, for bug control. And you don't have those herbs. You just have hope. So you lie still and try not to think about the itch or the scratch or the strange sound outside that might be a fox or a thief or a particularly judgmental owl. Eventually you doze, but your sleep is shallow. You dream of kneeling, of stitching, of someone asking you whether your prayer book has too much gold leaf on the cover, and if that means you're vain. You wake once around midnight, which is normal. Medieval sleep was biphasic. Remember, people often had a first and second sleep. In between, they might pray, meditate, talk softly, or
Do other things we won't mention because this is PG-13, and also you're currently lying next to your sister. You sit up briefly, sip water from a wooden cup, stretch, stare into the dark. This time you don't say a prayer. You just think. You wonder, is this it? Is this all life will be? Will I do this again tomorrow? And the next day? And for 50 years? Until my hands curl like parchment and my eyesight fades from candlelight and squinting at embroidery hoops. The thought is too big, so you fold it up, like linen, like everything else, and you lie down again. Your sister mumbles something in her sleep. You pat her shoulder gently like a tiny benediction and close your eyes. By dawn, your body aches. Your hair has come loose, your shift is tangled, and there's a bite on your ankle that looks suspiciously like it has plans. But the light has returned. The rooster crows, and the performance begins again. Except wait, today is special. It's the feast day of a local saint, which means a procession, which means the possibility of being seen by someone important. So you sit up with slightly more purpose. You choose your finest gown, the blue one, the one that's faded at the hem but still has the good trim around the cuffs. You comb your hair with your fingers and re-braid it in your best approximation of holy but fashionable. You even apply a bit of color to your cheeks, not rouge heavens, no, that's for harlots, but a pinch to each side with cold fingers to encourage natural bloom. You eat faster. You walk straighter. And when the time comes to join the others in the town square, you do it all exactly right. You stand with poise. You sing the hymns. You nod at the right moments. You do not fidget. You do not yawn. You do not let your eyes linger on the priest's apprentice, even though he looks like he once smiled at you near the well. And for a moment, just a moment, you allow yourself to think, maybe this is enough. Maybe the routine, the rules, the rhythms, they aren't cages. Maybe they're choreography, a dance your body has learned to perform in silence, a survival ballet, a lullaby made of linen wood smoke and whispered prayers. The sun moves across the sky. The procession ends. You return home, and once again, you're tired in that medieval way, which is to say, tired in your bones, your joints, your dreams. You return to the bench, the hearth, the same bowl of barley stew. And as night falls once more, you begin to braid your hair for sleep, each strand a thread in the same silent fabric you've been weaving your whole life. But maybe you braid it a little looser tonight. A tiny rebellion, a secret stitch, a whisper into the night, I'm still here. Get some rest. You deserve it. But don't fall asleep. We have another weird ritual waiting for you. You're still awake, aren't you? Maybe just barely. Maybe with one eye open, or maybe slumped sideways like a tired candle. That's all right, because tonight's story doesn't need you wide-eyed. It just needs you here. Because as we settle into part 11, we're finally arriving at something you might not have expected in this world of endless posture checking and spoon silencing play. Yes, play, leisure, recreation, joy even, but don't get too excited. This is still the medieval world, and even fun comes with rules. You see, contrary to popular belief, medieval women did laugh, did joke, did celebrate. But they did so within a carefully curated maze of social expectations. There were limits on where, how, and especially why you could enjoy yourself. Let's zoom in on a very specific place, shall we? It's the year 1461, and you're at a May Day celebration in a small village
in the south of England. The sun is out. The trees are newly green. There's a garland of daisies in your hair. Not because it's fashionable, but because someone thrust it into your hands and you weren't allowed to refuse. You're standing with a group of women all dressed in their festival best, meaning their second best dress, with the least visible stains. Around you, children race through the grass, and boys chase girls with handfuls of flower petals. The local blacksmith is tuning his lute, which sounds less like music and more like a cat giving birth to a wheelbarrow. And in the center of the square, a maypole, tall, decorated, slightly crooked. The music starts, the dance begins, and you take a step forward carefully, gripping the ribbon in your hand like it might judge you. Because even in this moment of supposed wild joy, you are not free. You are still performing. Let's talk about the medieval rules of dancing. You must move in rhythm. You must not lift your arms too high. You must not spin with too much enthusiasm. You must always watch where your feet land, both literally and socially. Why? Because dancing in the eyes of many clerics and elders walked a fine line between holy celebration and slippery sin. Too much movement, too much laughter, too many flushed cheeks. You'd go from joyful maiden to potential temptation in less time than it takes to untangle a maypole. One cleric in 15th century Flanders once wrote that laughter and leaping are the doorway to lust, which makes you wonder what he thought about jumping rope. Still dancing wasn't just permitted, it was expected. In certain contexts, during certain seasons, under heavy supervision. So here you are, braiding your ribbon into the others, smiling, not too widely, moving with enough energy to appear festive, but not so much that your veil slips, laughing, but never guffawing, never leaning in too close to the miller's son, even though he smells like honey and makes that crooked half smile you once saw in your dreams. Eventually the dance ends. You step back. You dab your face with a linen square even if you're not sweating, just in case. You murmur thanks to the musician. You return to your place among the women. Let's pause, because while this looks like freedom and maybe feels like it too, it's still embedded in performance. Even leisure is graded, observed, commented on later by your aunt over porridge. Did you see how she ran toward the pole? She smiled too easily. She's too light on her feet. And that phrase, too light on her feet, wasn't always a compliment. In some villages, women were warned not to dance too skillfully for fear of being labeled distracting, as if being good at something automatically made you suspect. But there were other games too, safer ones. Carding parties, for example. No, not gambling. Wool carding. A gathering where women came together to brush and align wool fibers before spinning. It was labor, yes, but it was also one of the rare chances to sit with other women and talk freely, or at least as freely as you could with 3 generations in the same room and a priest's niece standing by the door. This was when you told stories, shared recipes, traded herbal remedies, whispered about that one girl who sewed her veil on upside down last feast day and still hasn't lived it down. These carding gatherings were the cracks in the curtain, little moments where women's lives slipped out of performance and into something closer to honesty. You were still careful, yes, but you could laugh a little louder, sit a little slouched, even complain gently about how your fingers were chapped from wool grease. And when the stories turned to romance, everyone leaned in. Tales of women who fell in love, tales of marriages gone sour, tales of clever wives who outwitted grumpy husbands, tales of saints who turned down suitors and became legends, all wrapped in metaphor, all shared with wide eyes and half smiles, because storytelling was a weapon, a balm, a rope thrown across generations, and you listened, you learned, and one day you told one of your own. Now let's return to your leisure day. It's nearly sunset. The maypole is a tangle of ribbons. The musicians have stopped playing. The flower crowns are wilted and your cheeks are starting to itch from whatever mysterious pollen the village boy rubbed into them. But just as you turn to leave, something incredible happens. A woman steps forward, older, sharp-eyed, respected. She begins to sing, not a hymn, not a court song, a folk song about love and laundry and a fish that stole someone's wedding ring. It's funny, it's weird. It's improper in the most gentle, delightful way. And everyone laughs. Even the grandmother who hasn't smiled since the last eclipse. Even the priest's niece, even you. And for once, just once, no one corrects it. No one lowers the mood.
No one reminds you to sit up straight or smooth your veil or chew with your mouth closed. It's just laughter. Real human belly laughter. And you realize something? In this life of endless etiquette and unspoken rules of whispered prayers and carefully folded hands, joy isn't absent. It's just hidden, protected, pressed like a flower into the pages of your day. You carry it with you as you walk home, under the fading light, bare feet, brushing the cool dirt path, the scent of crushed grass following you like a secret. You won't forget this. Not the dance, not the joke, not the sound of women laughing and not being punished for it. And as you lie down that night, you don't pray first. You smile and fall asleep mid-laugh.
Dawn again. It always comes too soon in this world of candlelight and cold water. The rooster crows again. The church bell tolls again. And you, dear medieval woman, blink yourself awake for the 1000th time in a life that feels endlessly folded between prayer and posture. But something is different this morning. There's a letter. Well, not a letter exactly. More like a folded scrap of parchment with a wax seal and just enough ribbon to make your stomach flip. It's been slipped under the door by someone who didn't knock. The wax is warm from the sun, but it might as well be a flame in your hand. It's from your cousin, the one who married well, the one who now lives near the city where women wear imported velvet and talk in Latin without blushing. She's inviting you to visit for a week in a manor house with real sheets. You feel it immediately, the thrill, the terror, the need to prepare. Because while you've mastered the rules of your home, your village, your feast days, and your embroidery circles, a visit to the city means new rules, more rules, fancier, subtler, crueler rules. Rules that don't forgive the slightest wrong fork or crooked curtsy, so you begin to prepare. And so begins your journey into one of the most quietly brutal arenas of medieval womanhood, being a guest. Let's start with packing. You don't have a suitcase. You have a linen bundle tied carefully with a ribbon you've boiled and dried twice to make it smell less like sheep. You pack your best gown, the one with the blue cuffs, your emergency veil, your spare shift, your travel shoes, and most importantly, gifts. Because arriving empty-handed is the social equivalent of spitting on someone's porch. You bring a small jar of rose petal jelly, a scrap of embroidery you've been working on for weeks, a sprig of dried rosemary for the household altar. You wish it was more. You arrive 2 days later by cart sore, in places you forgot had bones, and already rehearsing your opening lines in your head. The manor is bigger than you imagined. Not a castle, but still imposing stone walls, arched windows, and door hinges that don't creak. You're greeted by servants who don't smile, and by your cousin who does, but only with her mouth. You are now on stage. Let's talk about what that means. In your village, performance was exhausting. In the manor, it's delicate warfare. Every word is measured. Every glance is a chess move. Every silence is a test. Your cousin has a new laugh. Her husband speaks to you like you might steal something. The maid who shows you to your room doesn't bother to pretend to like you. And you're doing everything you've ever been taught. Sit tall, speak low, eat slow, compliment the hearth decorations even if they look like someone glued acorns to sadness. The guest room is small, but it has a window with glass. Real glass. Wavy and bubbled, but still miraculous. You stare at it too long. You know better. You stop. That night you join the household for supper. There are 4 spoons at your place. 4. You don't panic. You copy your cousin. You reach for what she reaches for. You chew when she chews. You laugh when she laughs. You nod when she tells a story about visiting Paris, even though you've never been farther than the neighboring village where the baker once called you miss. Everything here is sharper, colder, more refined. Even the gossip sounds fancier. Instead of "did you hear what she did," it's "one wonders what her father must think." Instead of "she laughed at the priest," it's "her devotions seem more casual lately." On the 3rd day they test you. A guest arrives, a minor nobleman. He's younger than expected, with ink on his fingers and a smile that makes you forget to breathe. Your cousin introduces you with your full name, but skips the part about your father being a modest wool merchant. You're grateful and suspicious. The nobleman asks about your embroidery. You answer politely. He asks about the local church. You offer a carefully neutral opinion. He asks what books you've read. And here, dear reader, you falter, because the truth is you've read very few. But you know of them. You've seen your brother's psalter, your uncle's hunting manual, your aunt's copy of a herbal guide with illustrations so detailed they gave you nightmares. So you say, "I've read pieces of Boethius," which is true. You read a passage once, backwards, while hiding from chores. The nobleman smiles. He quotes Boethius. You nod as if you understand. You feel the world spinning too fast beneath your feet. The moment passes, but the echo stays. That night you cry in your guest bed, quietly, with your face turned toward the wall, so the maid won't notice in the morning. You're not ashamed, you're just tired. Tired of trying to exist in places where everything you do is wrong by default. On the 5th day, your cousin takes you to the market. It should be relaxing, familiar, but it's not. Here, markets are not muddy, messy chaos. They're theater. Women walk like swans. Boys carry baskets like they're auditioning for sainthood. The produce is cleaner than your soul. You buy nothing. You carry the basket. You walk 2 steps behind. And when a woman your age whispers, "country girl," behind her hand, you pretend not to hear. That night, your cousin compliments your stitching. It's the first nice thing she's said. You smile, and for a moment the knot in your chest loosens. Then she adds, "I couldn't manage stitches that fine until I was engaged." Strange how pressure helps us improve. You nod, you fold your hands, you say nothing. But inside something unfurls. Not anger, not sadness, just clarity. Because this trip has taught you something no feast day or embroidery lesson ever could. The rules don't stop at your village. The performance expands, the costumes change,
but the stage remains. And in the manner the rules are gilded, sharper, softer, designed not just to contain you, but to erase you if you're not careful. So on the 7th morning when it's time to leave, you pack your things without rushing. You thank your cousin. You bow to her husband. You compliment the maid's hair ribbon even though she rolls her eyes. And then you return home. The cart ride feels like freedom. You know you'll have to scrub dishes again, kneel longer at Mass, help your aunt stir barley until your arms go numb. But you also know this. You are more than your mistakes, more than your accent, more than your second best dress, more than a mismatched spoon. You survived the manor. And that in this world is something like winning.
You're home now. The manor is behind you. The stone walls, the cold glances, the conversations that felt like puzzles you weren't meant to solve. And though it was only 7 days, it felt like a season or maybe a whole year. You lived wrong on purpose. Back in your village, the air smells familiar again, like wood smoke, damp thatch, and other people's goats. You step off the cart and someone hands you a crust of black bread without asking if you're hungry. You chew slowly. It's dry, hard, comforting. No one here asks which fork you'll use. No one quotes Boethius. And yet the performance resumes. Because even back home, even among the people who watched you grow up with straw in your hair and porridge on your chin, you are still expected to be someone incredibly precise. And this week, that someone is eligible. Because ever since your return, the murmurs have shifted tone. Your visit to the manor wasn't just a visit. It was a test, a display, a subtle, unspoken question to the village. Is she ready to marry? Let's talk about courtship in the medieval world. Not romance, not poetry, not flowers and secret winks from across a crowded church nave. Courtship here is a ritual, a negotiation, a political alliance wrapped in candle wax and wool thread. You are 15 or 16 or maybe 17, old enough to be looked at but still young enough to be guided. Every movement now, every word is scrutinized for marriageability. Your posture suggests obedience. Your voice must be gentle, never witty. Your laugh polished like silver, just loud enough to be pleasant, never brazen. Your stitching impeccable. Your dowry, modest but present. A trunk with linens, a copper pan, a goat perhaps, a future. You are now a project. Your aunt starts adjusting your veil more often. Your uncle casually asks if you've prayed for a strong future. Your neighbor sends over her son with a basket of apples he clearly didn't pick himself. Everyone is moving pieces, and you are the board. Let's meet some suitors, shall we, suitor? One John the Cooper's apprentice. Broad-shouldered, shy. Owns one pair of shoes and a cow that allegedly survived the plague. His mother thinks he'd be steady. His father thinks he'd straighten out if married. You think he smells like fermented wood. He tells you that your hands are small. You nod. Suitor 2. Peter the traveling clerk. Educated, thin, always quoting saints you've never heard of. Asks if you can read, then talks over you when you say a little. Writes his own poems. One of them includes the line your neck like a purified candle. You pretend not to laugh. He wears fur-lined sleeves and touches your elbow too often. Suitor 3. Thomas the miller's son. Laughs loudly. Eats faster than you can say blessing. Offers to carry water for your household, then forgets and spills half of it. Thinks embroidery is magic. Smiles with his whole face. Calls your veil swan-colored, even though it's definitely beige. Each of them comes to your door, always with a reason.
a loaf of bread, a request for herbs, a casual question about mass schedules. Behind them, their mothers hover. Behind their mothers, the village holds its breath, because everyone knows a girl of your age and station does not have years. You have seasons, and this season is ripening. Let's talk about how you're meant to respond. You do not flirt. You do not refuse. You do not choose. You behave like soil, tilled, ready, and gracious for whatever seed is planted. Your job is to be charming but chaste, smart but not smarter than him, willing but not eager, an emotional Goldilocks, just right or not at all. And here's the maddening thing, you don't dislike all of them. John is kind, Peter is clever, Thomas makes you laugh in ways that feel dangerously alive. But none of them ask what you want. They don't even seem to consider that you want. They ask about your sewing, your church attendance, your bread making, never your dreams. And yes, you have dreams. You dream of time to think, to walk alone, to read something not assigned by a priest. You dream of going a day without performing. You dream of eating an entire apple without having to offer the last bite to someone else. But instead, you smile. You fold linen. You say thank you. You compliment Peter's handwriting and don't flinch when he corrects your pronunciation of paternoster. You say, yes, that's a strong goat, and mean it, because even courtship is a role. And you were cast the moment you hit puberty and someone noticed your ankles weren't awkward anymore. And then just when you think it will stretch on forever, a decision is made. By the family, by the priest, by the neighbors who weren't asked but gave opinions anyway. They choose John, and you don't cry. Because it could be worse, because you knew this was coming, because in a strange, tired way, you're relieved. Because John, sweet, silent, careful, John does not scare you. He brings you a wooden comb carved with flowers. You say thank you. You tuck it into your sleeve. You tell him the stew needs more salt. He nods like you've sung a hymn. The engagement is quiet, no ring, just agreement, just a string of prayers said under breath while the village nods and the sky stays gray and your stomach doesn't know whether to dance or sink. You braid your hair a little tighter that night. You look in the mirror, just a scrap of polished tin, and say, "This is good." You say it again, softer. And when the candle goes out, you lie awake and whisper your new name. Mrs. Someone, wife of John, a woman of the village, a woman who now belongs. And that is something. It's happening. The wedding. Not the grand kind you'd see in illuminated manuscripts. No ivory gowns, no choirs, soaring in vaulted cathedrals, no knights saluting from horseback. Yours is quieter, smaller, and smells like bread dough and sheep. The entire village knows, of course. Not because you sent out invitations, but because news moves like smoke here, invisible, inescapable, and occasionally stinging. The morning of your wedding, the sky is a dull white, not bright, not gloomy, just indecisive. A perfect metaphor, you think, for the state of your stomach. You rise before the rooster for once. There are chores to do. Yes, even today. You help prepare the lentil stew for the afternoon meal. You restart your veil. You sweep the floor one final time, even though it will be walked on again by people wearing shoes stained with sheep dung and onion skin wishes. It doesn't matter. You are not the bride in a fairy tale. You are the bride in a world where weddings are not days of indulgence, but contract ceremonies with a slightly nicer lunch. Let's talk about what you're wearing. Your best dress, still blue, still faded, but your aunt has added a row of stitches along the hem white thread. Dainty, so fine, it looks like lace if you squint kindly. Your hair is braided and coiled around your head in the traditional style, pinned with rosemary and humility.
and over your shoulders, a borrowed wool cloak, because the church is cold. And you don't want to shiver when you say I do. The walk to the church is short, too short. John is already there, of course, standing near the altar like he's waiting for judgment or stew, neither of which he's quite prepared for. You step forward. There are no gasps, no music, just the shuffle of boots on stone and the soft clearing of throats from elderly relatives who wish they'd eaten before they came. The priest begins. You listen, not to the words, but to the rhythm of them like rain on a thatched roof. Ancient syllables mumbled, Latin then, something that sounds like your name. And just like that, you're married. No kiss. That's for later. Maybe. The crowd exhales. Someone coughs. A child laughs too loud and is immediately shushed. And you feel the same. Not disappointed, not overjoyed, just anchored. As if the earth has reached up and placed a firm hand on your shoulder and said, yes, you belong now. Let's talk about the feast. It's modest, like everything else. A few benches set under a canopy of linen stretched between posts, bowls of turnip stew, black bread, a small jug of wine watered down just enough to make it holy, but not quite enough to make it cheerful. John sits beside you. He doesn't say much, but he smiles often. You nod at guests. You sip slowly. You ignore the ache in your cheeks from smiling like you mean it. You laugh at the story your uncle tells about his goat escaping during his wedding in 1412. You pretend you haven't heard it 6 times. There's a dance. Of course there is. You step forward, take John's hand, and follow the slow circular pattern the villagers have known since before anyone had last names. It's not elegant, it's not perfect, but it's real. And somewhere between the third spin and the second cup of ale, you feel something strange bloom in your chest, gratitude. Not for the dress, not for the stew, not even for the ceremony, but for this moment. This breath of normalcy in a life that has been nothing but performance. For this man who doesn't correct your grammar or quote saints at you. For the children chasing each other around the benches with crusts of bread like trophies. For your aunt who made your veil smell like rosemary. For this version of joy not loud, not shiny, but soft and woven into the edges. Later that night you return to John's home, which is now your home, which is frankly the same size as the one you left, only colder. The fire has gone out. Your new mother-in-law, yes, she still lives here, mutters something about taking care of your husband and retreats behind a curtain that separates one room from the other. You and John are alone. He looks at you. You look at him. You smile first. He stammers. Do you want, should I? You shake your head. I'm just tired, you whisper. He nods. He lays out a blanket on the straw bed. He sits down, offers his hand. You take it, not because you must, because you choose to. And that's the difference. You lie down beside each other, fully clothed, fully exhausted, fully aware that this is the beginning, not the end. You whisper, thank you. He says, for what? And you say, for not. Talking about Boethius. He laughs. You laugh. Then you both lie there in silence. Not performance, not posture, just peace. And when the candle finally gutters out and the room goes dark and the wind slips through the cracks in the shutter, you close your eyes and think, maybe I can love this life. Not all at once, not in every moment, but enough. Enough to stay. Enough to wake up tomorrow and make porridge and sew linen and whisper jokes under your breath while the bread bakes, enough to laugh again someday in the village square, enough to remember who you are underneath the veil and the posture and the perfect bite-sized etiquette. You are not just a bride, not just a woman, not just a performance. You are a person. And tonight, for the first time in a long time, you get to rest like one.
The sun rises a little slower now. Or maybe you do. You're no longer a daughter of someone's house. You're a wife now. A woman of your own hearth, sort of. You still live under someone else's roof. You still share a bed with straw that pokes your ribs at 2 a.m. You still have to stir the porridge before the bottom burns. But something is different. Subtle. Quiet. Your mornings begin the same way, the scrape of cold feet on colder floors, the sigh of the fire not quite catching on the first spark, the clink of pewter against wood as you ladle barley into bowls. John helps now sometimes. He's slow with the spoons, but fast with his hands. And he doesn't complain when your bread turns out more like a weapon than a meal. You're getting used to him. Not just his presence, but his rhythm. The way he hums tunelessly when he's thinking. The way he folds his hands before meals even when he's alone. The way he doesn't talk unless the words matter, and when they do, he says them gently.
It's not love, not yet, but it's steady. And in the medieval world where everything from the weather to your neighbor's goats can betray you steady is a rare and precious kind of joy. Let's talk about your new role. As a wife, you are now the center of a small domestic universe. Your job isn't simply to cook or clean or sew. It's to maintain the invisible systems that make life tolerable, knowing when the bread starter needs to be refreshed,
When to water down the ale for guests. When to soothe your mother-in-law's temper with flattery and chamomile. When to let John talk.
when to let him sit in silence. You are part housekeeper, part diplomat, part therapist, and always, always a performer, though the stage is smaller now. Just a home with 3 walls, a hearth, and 1,000 ways to fail quietly. Let's walk through a day.
Morning chores. You fetch water, not from a well, from a stream down the slope past the old yew tree that always smells like damp secrets. You balance the bucket on your hip like you were born doing it, which in a way you were. You collect eggs from hens that hate you. You scatter feed. You check the vegetable patch for any signs of slugs, rot, or divine punishment. You return with wet skirts and cold hands. You reheat yesterday's soup. You wipe the table with a cloth you wove yourself. You kneel beside the fire and stir until your knees ache. Midday quiet John is out helping with fences or hauling wood or pretending to barter in town. You stay inside alone with your thoughts and your stitching. Sometimes your thoughts stitch too. You think of that girl from the manor, the one who smiled like she knew the Latin word for freedom, the one whose shoes never had mud on them. You wonder if she thinks of you? Probably not. You work on your linen hem. You prick your finger. You do not curse. You suck the blood and whisper, Saint Apollonia, grant me patience, even though she's technically the patron saint of teeth. You hum to the rhythm of the needle. Afternoon errands. You walk to the market, not to buy, just to be seen, because married women are still watched. Are you respectful? Do you haggle? Do you greet the baker's wife with enough warmth, but not too much cheer? You trade dried thyme for beeswax. You nod at the cloth merchant. You avoid the priest because he always asks how married life is suiting you with that slow, syrupy grin that makes your stomach twist like curdled milk. You return home.
The hearth is still warm. The table still stands. You're doing okay. Evening rhythms. John returns. He doesn't knock. He smells like hay and sweat and something that might be beer. You pour water into a basin. He washes his hands. You bring bread. You sit across from him. You eat without ceremony. Just bread stew silence and the sound of the world continuing. Sometimes he speaks. Tonight he says, the roof'll need patching next week. You nod. You say, I'll ask Marta if she has tar. And just like that, your marriage continues, built not on passion or poetry, but on shared logistics. Later, your mother-in-law snores behind her curtain. You and John lie beside each other. He doesn't reach for you. You don't reach for him. You just exist side by side like 2 pages in the same book. Not yet read. Not yet written. Just there. And that's something. Let's talk now about what they don't tell you when you become a wife. They don't tell you that you'll miss your own name, not the name itself, but the way it sounded when it was yours alone. Before it was attached to someone else. Before it was Mrs. Before it was his woman. Before it was spoken only in reference to who you serve, not who you are. They don't tell you how quiet marriage is, how it fills every room but says so little, how sometimes when the wind picks up, it feels like the only voice that remembers you is the one in your own head. They don't tell you how much you'll still perform, not for crowds, but for your mother-in-law, for visiting relatives, for the priest, for the neighbors, for the voice in your head that says, stand straight, stir slowly, smile just enough. Don't spill, don't shout, don't stop. But they also don't tell you that there's power in routine. There's power in being the one who knows where the herbs are kept, who remembers when to salt the fish, who keeps the bread from burning. There's power in small things, in kneading, in listening, in lighting a candle exactly when the light begins to fade. You begin to understand why women older than you seem calm. They've folded their frustration into the bread, stitched their disappointment into seams, hung their hopes on drying racks next to rosemary and thyme, and somehow they've survived. So you will too. Tonight John brings you a small thing, a pine cone oddly shaped, smooth on one side. He found it by the stream. It looked like a heart, he says. It doesn't, but you smile anyway. You tuck it onto the mantel beside the bone spoon your grandmother left you and the wax flower you made at 13. You lie down beside him. You sleep. And in your dreams, no one watches you. You don't walk carefully. You don't smile politely. You run, barefoot, veil undone, and you laugh, not like a tinkling bell in velvet, not like a woman performing joy. You laugh like a girl who just got away with something, and maybe you did. Years pass, not in grand sweeping gestures, but in soft repetitions, in bread baked in shirts mended in prayers, whispered into the folds of darkness. Days stitched to days like pieces of linen plain, useful, unremarkable, unless you look closely at the threads. You've changed, not in a way anyone would write songs about, but in quieter, slower ways. The way your hands move without thinking, the way your body bends just slightly before the aches begin, the way you say yes before anyone asks because you already know what's needed. You're still a wife, but now you're also a mother. Let's pause here because this part of the story is important, not because it's dramatic, but because it's relentless. Motherhood in the medieval world was not wrapped in pink cloth and lullabies. It was blood and fear and exhaustion that slipped into your bones and lived there like a second soul. Your first child came in the spring.
The midwife arrived late. The fire had gone out. The sheets were old and stiff from last year's baptisms. You screamed once, then twice, then said nothing at all. They placed her in your arms, a girl, tiny, red, quiet. You cried harder than she did. John named her after his grandmother. You wanted to name her after the moon, but there's no saint named after the moon, so you let it go. She's yours anyway. And for the next year, your life is her life. You rise when she rises. You rock her when she cries. You sing songs you don't remember learning. You make milk out of barley water and hope. You pray every night that she lives. And every morning when she does, you thank a dozen saints by name. You lose one baby too, quietly, in winter, before she had a name. No one talks about it. They say she wasn't meant to stay. You nod, then return to kneading bread like your womb hadn't just turned into a grave. You don't cry for a week. Then one morning while hanging clothes, you see a robin land on the fence post. You sob until your knees give out. You survive because that's what women do. Not by miracle, by muscle memory. You keep going. You have 3 more children, each one different, each one louder, each one a world inside your world. You love them more than your own breath. You fear for them more than you feared the manor. You teach them what you can. You lie about the rest. Because how do you explain to a child that being good isn't always enough, that their laughter must be measured, their joy folded neatly, their thoughts softened before they're spoken? You try to keep some wildness in them. You let them run barefoot longer than your neighbors approve of. You teach them how to whistle. You let them name the chickens. You smile when they ask if saints ever burped. You say yes. Let's talk now about your body. Because after childbirth, it's different. Your back aches before dawn. Your knees sound like wood. Your hands are cracked from soap made of lye and fat. Your breasts, once yours then theirs, are now neither. Your hair is streaked with silver. But John still calls you beautiful. Only once a month. Always at night, never loudly. It's enough. Let's talk about friendship. Because that too changes. Your closest friend married someone in the next village. You see her once a year on St. Catherine's Day, when the weather is kind and the mule doesn't limp. When you see each other, you don't squeal or run. You just sit, side by side, hands busy, hearts open. You speak of nothing and everything, and that's enough. Some days, you still remember the girl you were, the girl who danced at the maypole, the girl who survived the manor, the girl who once dreamed of apples and laughter and waking up without a task list in her head. You think of her when the sky turns gold, when your daughter braids your hair with dandelions, when the bread rises just right. You do not miss her. You carry her. You were never just a role. You were always a story. And that story continues. So now you've seen her life. Not the dramatized version, not the fairy tale, but the slow, gentle unraveling of a medieval woman's days, stitched together with labor, laughter, and longing. She lived in silence, but not submission. She followed rules, but still carved out slivers of rebellion, tiny, beautiful acts of defiance no one ever recorded. She loved, lost, labored. She dreamed even when dreams weren't allowed. And maybe in some quiet corner of your own modern life, you recognize her. Maybe you see her in your rituals, in your exhaustion, in your strength. Maybe she lives in the way you fold laundry while thinking of 1,000 other things. In the way you hold someone's hand, not because you must, but because you choose to. In the way you laugh freely now without needing anyone's permission. Her story ends in no grand event, no palace, no war, no crown.
Just a candle, a quiet room, a woman who survived in a world that forgot to ask what she wanted, and yet she lived anyway. Let that be the lullaby tonight. Let her footsteps walk you to sleep. Let her story remind you there is dignity in the daily. There is defiance in the small. There is beauty in the boring. Dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's rest together.